Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio, Sinoland in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And I am just absolutely head over heels to have on the show today Ms. Diana Johnstone. How are you doing today, Diana?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Yeah, Diana's in France, and I'll just a quick intro. She is a native of Minnesota. She was raised in New Deal, Washington. She has spent more than half her life in Europe as a political observer and journalist, working for Agence France-Presse, for In These Times as European correspondent and as press officer for the Green Group in the European Parliament. She holds a BA in Russian Area Studies and a PhD in French Literature. She is the author of 5 books, including The Politics of Euromissiles, Europe's Role in America's World. Then next, Fool's Crusade, Yugoslavia, NATO, and Western Delusions. And then I love this title, Queen of Chaos, the Misadventures of Hillary Clinton. Then she co-authored a book with her father, Paul H. Johnstone, entitled From Mad to Madness, Inside Pentagon Nuclear War Planning. And we are on the show together today to talk about her amazing new autobiography called A Circle in the Darkness, Memoir of a World Watcher. So thank you so much for being on the show, Diana.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to talk to you.
I actually interviewed Diana 2.5 years ago, too long, but I did have the honor and pleasure of meeting her and her friend Jean Bricmont. We were actually in Bayeux together up in Normandy, and it was just a wonderful opportunity. And she said, "Oh, I'm writing my book. Clarity Press told me they wanted me to write my autobiography," and I thought, "Wow." That's amazing. So I told her that as soon as it came out, I wanted to buy a copy, and I got the ebook straight from Clarity Press, and it is an amazing read. Diana, after reading your autobiography, your childhood, and I mean, you have led a storied life, and it's just an amazing autobiography. But I'd like to focus today on Europe, and I think maybe, Circle in the Darkness may be telling us something, because after reading your book, it looks like Europe is slowly destroying its future. And so I wanted to talk about 4 broad topics that all involve France, and maybe the last one will be hopeful, I hope. But the first one is Brussels superstate, the European Union neoliberalism. Then next is Serbia's destruction, then Ukraine's debasement, and then France with the yellow vests. And so let's just go ahead and start. I had no idea about all the privatization going on in France, and to go on record, I'm a dual national. I have a French passport and an American passport, and spend time and love France, and my wife is French, and so I do have some skin in this game. Just talk to us about the Brussels superstate and how Europe has just been slowly neoliberalized like the United States. That came as kind of a shock to me.
Well, yes. In fact, the thing is that Europe has been sold to the Europeans, first of all, and then to the rest of the world as this wonderful way of making peace in Europe. Everybody will get together, but in fact, the political goals very quickly gave way to the economic intentions, and that was actually from the very beginning. One of the so-called founders' fathers, Jean Monnet, was a businessman who was very Americanized, and his idea, in fact, was just to use Europe to break down the nation state as a step toward globalization, which would, of course, be directed mainly from the United States. And that totally economic goal was a bit, in fact, that is the way that Europe has been constructed is through economic organization from the community, economic agreements and so on. And the fact is that the European construction has been so entirely economic that it has not brought people together in the way that the ideal was to make Europe into a sort of United States where there'd be a European nationality and people would feel European. In fact, that's not the case at all, because it seems to me, having been here for a very long time, that decades ago, before Europe got so constructed, one heard much more about what was going on in other European countries and in the world. And in fact, the unification of Europe has not at all brought people together in the sense of awareness of what's going on in other European countries. There's almost no news about the Eastern European members or the Northern members. There's this myth here about a German American couple, which it's a myth that exists in France but not in Germany. And we hear something about Italy, a little bit about Spain, about Greece when it's going under, but in fact there is no psychological, emotional unification going on. And this health crisis has brought that out, because the virus crisis, it proves that Europe just did not exist. There was no help from Europe. There was no solidarity. There was no European solidarity when it came to the crisis, and that sort of exposed something that, in fact, is already there. The problem is that the European unification process was taken over by neoliberals, especially after the Thatcherite. There is no alternative.
Tina.
Exactly, in the Tina phase, and the idea that it has to be that way, that we have to make, that the government is there to make countries friendly to investment capital. And making them friendly to investment capital means tearing down the social state. That's what it means. Now, this is very most felt, I think, in France, because you had a very important functioning social state here, the best medical care in the world. That was and all of this neoliberalism has been to force the countries to cut their public costs, which means cutting back on the social services. And that, of course, has led to a lot of conflict. But you see, Europe started out, it said it was guaranteeing peace, but it didn't guarantee peace because Europe got involved in destroying Yugoslavia through war. That was in Europe. And the European unity did nothing to stop that. On the contrary, the unity dragged in countries that might not have been involved in that. So it is, the European Union does not work for peace. It works to involve European countries in the conflict that the United States chooses.
Yeah, and the way, and just whenever I go back to Europe, we try to go back every summer. Although this summer's looking really doubtful, but may have to be in the fall, in the autumn. But it's a joke about how corrupt Brussels is, and everybody just jokes and just kind of shrugs their shoulders about what a cesspool Brussels is, and it's like no one can do anything about it. And then you mentioned in that one chapter the Maastricht Treaty, people were voting it down, and then the parliament, and then the parliaments would just ignore them and voted for the Maastricht Treaty anyway, which was nothing more than just a neoliberal anthem to privatize everything. I was shocked when I read your book.
Well, yes, you see, the Maastricht Treaty. I was actually working for the Green Group in the European Parliament at that time, and when the Maastricht Treaty came up, I actually read it in French and English. A lot of people didn't, because there was a huge hype about that treaty. It was, especially that they showed young people, oh, that's the future, goody, 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 we're going to have this wonderful, and if you weren't for it while you were a far-right fascist or nationalist or something like that, and the Maastricht Treaty, really, I think most people didn't read it closely because there was so much propaganda. People just followed the propaganda. And the thing that struck me when I read it was, my God, this makes it illegal to have Keynesian policies. I'm not talking about socialism, but this made it illegal in Europe to have simply Keynesian economic policies. It had to be the German bankers' notion of the main thing is to stop inflation, which means you can't really have an industrial policy such as France had. Mm-hmm. So, but then in 2005, this European treaty came up, which simply went farther than Maastricht, but in the same direction. And that time, people did read it.
Yeah, you described that and how they voted, got it organized, and people actually voted against it.
Yeah, because once people started saying, let's look at it ourselves, they realized that this was disastrous for the social Europe that everybody thinks Europe is supposed to be the social Europe. But in fact, these treaties have made it virtually impossible to continue with social Europe. And it's you see, this health crisis brought this out because it's been cutting back, closing hospitals, getting rid of beds, hospital beds, not firing, because they don't fire health people, but if they just they let them retire and don't replace them, so that the personnel is overworked and inadequate, and all of these things are following directions from the Brussels bureaucracy. Now, corrupt, I don't know that I would say the corrupt it's what you mean by corrupt is in fact the influence of lobbyists. Now, I don't know how corrupt that is in the sense of somebody bribing somebody, but the influence is there. Mm-hmm. The influence can be there without bribery because they put people in office in Brussels. All these commissioners are chosen by governments, and they're all chosen not because they are people of any consequence that the public is interested in, but because they follow this neoliberal mindset. Mm-hmm. And the thing that matters is competition. And competition, the purpose of Europe is not solidarity as one could imagine, but competition. Competition is sacred, and nothing must go against competition. And that ends up with the member states actually competing with each other. So that far from unifying Europe, in many ways it's dividing Europe. Mm-hmm. It's antagonisms, because in competition somebody wins and somebody loses. And usually these days it's Germany has won, Greece has been a big loser, now Italy is losing, and France isn't doing that well in this game either. And so there are the feeling of there's a great loss of enthusiasm, to put it mildly.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, listen, you practically wrote half your book on this, and there's and there's just whole books on this, and and then after I read this, I go, well, now I know why she said circle in the darkness, because this is not a pretty picture. Let's move on to Serbia's destruction. And you were there. I mean, you had some great on the ground stories. I mean, you actually were there when all this was going on in Kosovo and Serbia, and it was just an amazing. It was just amazing to read what all that you did and where you went and who you talked to, and it's just reporting that we just don't normally get to see on, in the mainstream media. And it's so sad. I mean, Serbia's destruction as a European country. Just walk us through. What you want to tell us about the horrible destruction of Serbia.
Well, Yugoslavia is very important in my life, but much more important in the history of imperialism.
Yeah.
Now, you see, I don't consider my book exactly an autobiography, because I don't consider that I'm the subject. I'm the observer.
Okay.
And I wrote an earlier book, Fool's Crusade, was a history about Yugoslavia. This more tells, because it's more personal all the way through. I'm the observer, but it's history as I'm observing it, and not as looking it up as in the other book. And I was in Yugoslavia already as a student, so I had a familiarity with Yugoslavia that most people certainly didn't have, and so I had the advantage of being able to understand things a little more quickly, and. So I recount in this book exactly my own personal experience of Yugoslavia, which I think is interesting because it's an abstraction to most people, and it was really a decisive moment in history, because the Yugoslavia was used as an experiment for everything that's come afterwards. That is to say, it was the end of the Soviet Union, and people were thinking, aha, we can have peace. And instead, this whole thing was manipulated. Yugoslavia the tearing apart of Yugoslavia was actually encouraged, and by various, and they use various techniques that keep being used. That is to say, Yugoslavia was a multicultural country, a multinational country, I would say. Now, at the same time that the West is, by talking in favor of globalization, keeps saying how wonderful we should all be together and multicultural. I mean, that was their line. And at the same time, they were actively tearing apart a multicultural country in Europe by sponsoring the right-wing nationalists in Croatia, who, by the way, often were not living in Croatia because there was a huge diaspora of Croatian fascists who had gone to Germany, Canada, and the United States, and were very active in supporting Croatian nationalism. And this was, and of course, in Bosnia, the United States was actually allied with Osama bin Laden in sending in Muslim fighters to kill the Serbs. But the media didn't report that. The media reported that the Serbs were horrible and were racist and so on. And it was rather the other way around. So the use of minorities has become a constant with U.S. imperialism. They find disgruntled minorities, and they're doing well. Let's find somebody who isn't happy with the system, and make a huge campaign about how they are victims of human rights violations. And so what we have to do is go bomb the country in order to protect their human rights, and or sanction it or whatever. So Yugoslavia was really the guinea pig in experiment for this new wave of U.S. world domination. And Yugoslavia was a good target because it was independent socialist. It was not part of the Soviet bloc. It had broken away a long time ago. So it was there. It was not totally obedient to the Western command. And also it had been part of the non-aligned movement. Mm-hmm. And these were good reasons to destroy that country. And they made the villain of Serbia because Serbia was the center of it. And the Serbian desire, which was shared by many others, by the way, to keep the country together, was portrayed as conquest. I mean, this is crazy because the Serbian Milosevic at most was trying to keep the country together, but was ready for compromise. And keeping the country together was portrayed in the media as a program of conquest of the country, of his own country. And he was compared to Hitler, and so this incredible propaganda. And what is very significant is that this propaganda appealed especially to the left. And this brought the left, the so-called left in the West, into the imperialist project very strongly. And the Greens, who had started out as a peace party, actually in Germany, the foreign minister was a Green, and so the Greens have become a major war party, all in the name of protecting human rights. And so
it's surreal. It's just surreal.
Well, and you see, the incredible thing is that people have bought this. They have believed this.
Yeah.
They did this. And even today, there's a terrible anti-Serb propaganda in the world. They've made out Serbia as a villain. And, of course, the Chinese, you are very aware of that because their Chinese embassy was bombed by the United States in the war because China has been a friend to the Serbs and still is, in fact. But this is very much disapproved by the West. But the main purpose, I think, of all this was to revive NATO as an active force. The United States used this as an excuse to transform NATO from what was supposed to be a defense pact, which is always doubtful because the Soviet threat was a myth anyway. But the Soviet Union was not there, so what was NATO supposed to be? And so Yugoslavia was used as a pretext that, we need NATO to go out of its defense area in order to protect populations that are being oppressed by their own governments. Mm-hmm. And this gave a new life, a new horrible, aggressive life to NATO. And Yugoslavia did all of that. And it transformed the left into a war party, and it revived NATO as a world conquest tool of the United States.
Unbelievable. And also, they used depleted uranium, and now sections of Serbia are having, birth defects, and and miscarriages and cancers at the same rate as Nagasaki and Hiroshima. After the atomic bombing there, it's one of the most atrocious crimes against humanity and there are many. The West has committed many.
There's another I'd mention. Part of the breakup of Yugoslavia was that the northern parts, Slovenia and Croatia, were a bit richer than the south, and they had been part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there was a huge propaganda thing coming from Germany and so on to support Croatian nationalism. And in Slovenia and Croatia, they were richer, and leaders got in power who thought, well, we'd be better off being part of rich Europe than being the poorest part of rich Europe than being the richest part of Yugoslavia. And so they led secession for these reasons. And now that Yugoslavia is broken up into these pieces, people are worse off in every single one of them, including the one in the European Union. It has been really bad for the whole population. And in some ways, the Serbs are doing better than the rest. Despite all being demonized and all of that, somehow statistics show Serbia is not worse off than the rest of them. But it has been devastating for people in Bosnia because the war, which was absolutely promoted, the Bosnian War was totally promoted by Washington, and the people there now they are never reconciled. The situation is terrible there. And none of those states, the little countries, they're all dependent. Whereas Yugoslavia had a certain independence, it was a country in the world. They're all dependent, and they're all worse off. The people are worse off in all of them.
Okay, well, let's jump from the fat. Let's jump from the fat into the fire. Ukraine's debasement. It was a part of. It became a part of Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union and the rape and plunder of the former Russian, the former Soviet states. And this is another just incredible story, that you wrote about with the Maidan and the massacres and the country being run by fascists and I mean real Nazis. I mean these guys are hardcore, and this is supposed to be Europe. Tell us about that, please.
Well, once again, you have this, as you did with Croatia. You have this. There's a lot of parallel between Croatia and Ukraine, except Croatia is small and it's not as bad. But the war there was in that area of Croatia called the Krajina, which is the same word as Ukraine. It means a border country, and there were Serbs. There was Serb majority, and the Croats were wanting to throw them out. But a border country has a history of being pulled in different directions, and so eastern Ukraine was really essentially belonging to Russia, and so on, and western Ukraine had been part of Poland and this, that, and the other, and had there been a lot of Catholic propaganda about the West being civilized and the East being barbarian and that sort of thing. And so you had this historic problem there, and of this there really, the Ukraine is really a huge border that didn't really have a state a serious state history as Russia did or other places, but there were a huge number of refugees, as from who went, Nazi sympathizers or fascist sympathizers, who went to the United States or Canada and were welcomed by the United States government because they were rabidly anti-Russian, anti-communist, which would come thing. So sometimes their anti-communism was simply a racial anti-Russian sentiment. And you see that Eastern European refugees played a huge role in defining Cold War policy in the United States. The United States welcomed everybody, the old Nazis and so on. If they were anti-communist, come right in and become an expert on the world. And since a lot of Americans, even elites, didn't know very much about the world, somebody comes in from Ukraine and says, "Oh, I know all about communism. I know all about Europe. I can tell you how terrible it is and how much we're all yearning for you to come and rescue us." And this flatters American leaders. Oh gosh, they love us. They want us to come and liberate them. And this discourse became absolutely dominant in Washington. And the Ukrainian is a big country. There are a lot of them, and much more influential than Croatians, who are just a few. But the Ukrainian lobby played a huge role. And then when the Ukraine and the Baltic states left the Soviet Union, the United States in the Baltic states has simply put in the leaders who had been refugees in the United States and had been educated in the United States. They simply they had all of this store of exiles who they could put back there in dominant positions, and of course pouring money in to support their own puppets, and of course this whole the whole thing. I mean, I can't tell it all, but it's
yeah, I know. It's
the main thing to say though is
they need to read your book. Everybody read Diana's book. It's amazing. I loved it.
The main thing is Crimea, because when the United States really sponsored a putsch, a coup that overthrew the elected government of Ukraine, and Ukraine was set to join NATO, the Russians could not really accept Crimea being part of the Ukraine, because that's where the main naval base of Russia is. Moreover, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, the Crimeans had wanted to be part of Russia. Mm-hmm. They were only part of Crimea because Khrushchev in 1954 gave Crimea to Ukraine, and the Ukrainian population, and this is on the record, from the very beginning they didn't want to be part of Ukraine. Yeah. So it's perfectly natural to have a referendum at this point, and so that the Crimeans could say they want to be part of Russia and go back to Russia, and which they had been historically a part of. And this is portrayed in the West as a Russian invasion and takeover of Crimea.
That's ridiculous.
No, it's ridiculous. And at the same time, these are the people who bombed Serbia and to take Kosovo away from Serbia to give it to a bunch of gangsters. Mm-hmm. The hypocrisy, you can't even talk about hypocrisy. It's way beyond. It's way beyond the level of lies. And of course that is really, I say that's a theme of my book, because I think I start out as an observer. I'm a naive person. I go out to see the world. I don't have any preconceptions. And I'm just finding out how much lies we are told, and how much not what we've been told about, and how the media just joins the propaganda rather than telling us the truth about things. And so the circle in the darkness is really not quite what you say, because the circle in the darkness that's an image that my father liked. And the idea is you think of your knowledge growing as a circle of light, you know, the circle gets bigger and bigger, but the circumference is all of that you don't know on the outside.
Yeah.
And so the more you know that you don't know, that there's more to know.
Yeah.
And I really, I think my whole idea here is to look for the truth, you see, get beyond and of course you do run up all the things you don't know. But of course, you're right about the darkness of Europe. That's true.
Well, Diana, you did a great job of telling the truth in your book, in your memoir, and I mean, I learned a lot, and I'm not exactly a mainstream guy, and I do a lot of research, and you really, really educated me on so much stuff. Before we move on to France and the Yellow Vests, I would like to just point out that another reason that Crimea was so important to Russia is that it is considered to be the birthplace of Russian Orthodoxy. I mean, it's considered to be the birthplace of the Russian Orthodox Church. So for them to have lost Crimea to a bunch of World War II fascists would have just been, the ultimate humiliation. So I'm glad that the Crimeans had their opportunity to vote, and actually I found out it wasn't the first time. I recently interviewed Russell Bentley. He's in the Donbass. And he said they actually had a couple of something like in 1994 or something like that.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
Yeah, and so, but they didn't do it. But they expressed their sentiment that they wanted to be a part of Russia. But
that's what I was referring to. That's what I meant. I mean, it was well known from the time that Ukraine became independent that the Crimeans wanted to stay with Russia, and they voted that, and there's no secret about it. So to say that this was aggressive, and they not only, the propaganda line is not only that the Russians invaded Crimea, but that shows that they're getting ready to invade everybody else. and so we have to have NATO right on their borders with nuclear weapons because they're coming after everybody. It's total lie.
Unbelievable. Well, listen, you have done a Yo Woman's work in talking about the Yellow Vests in the last year, and I can also say Raman Mazaheri's done a great job reporting on it too. And between the two of you, you really expose, the source of the real organic anger that the Yellow Vests represent, and after reading your book, I go, well, of course, all this EU neoliberalism and privatization, and then when I was reading your book, I was going, oh yeah, Macron. One of the dog bones, one of the crumbs that he threw the Yellow Vests is that he promised to stop privatizing the airports, like that was going to be really help them out. So just, we've had some pretty I don't want to say negative, but just realpolitik, Brussels, Serbia, Ukraine. Can we leave this interview today, Diana, with some hope? With some hope that the Yellow Vests may be able to wake up the people in Europe and inspire some real institutional change.
Well, the movement is still there. The people are still there. Of course, we are all in confinement, but it hasn't gone away, and the influence is very much there. And France is special because it has this tradition of a mixed economy, and the French easily accept that there should be nationalization and so on. That's not the case of all European countries, and that's why I see great possibilities for change in Europe, in France. But I think that this would only be related. The French influence, I think, does not exist except in the South. I think if France took a big step, it would influence Spain, it would influence Italy. But the Northerners are very much Americanized and ready for neoliberalism. So I think it would be difficult for France. There's a great potential in France, which is based on history and so on. But can France change in this context? Will the rest of the West allow France to change? Mm-hmm. Because the influences, especially the United States and so on, are all over the place. So I never predict the future because the future is just full of surprise. And we see that all the time. I just say that the potential for a different society, for a better society, for a mixed economy, which is sort of like China in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right, Diana.
That's some formula that works. and it has worked in France, of course, with great differences from China. But I mean, it's a formula that works, and the present formula doesn't work. And France is more able to absorb that and to that lesson than other countries. But I don't know about how much influence it will have, except in the Latin countries. If France made a big step, it would have an influence in Italy and Spain.
And Spain and maybe Greece.
Well, poor Greece is
has been raped and plundered. Unfortunately,
yeah, there's not much left of it. I mean, but of course, Belgium is the perfect example of Europe because it's divided in itself between North and South.
Yeah.
You have the Flemish Walloons who will easily sympathize with the French, and the Flemish who are Germanic, and that division of Europe is still very much there. There's North-South, Germanic, this Latin division exists, but this doesn't mean they have to be a war. They should just be allowed to be themselves. That's all. Just let countries be themselves. That's what globalization is trying to destroy.
Yeah.
They can't be themselves. They have to be some miserable copy of what the United States thinks it is.
Absolutely. Well, it's, the only problem is that, Jacques Chirac was, I think, a pretty good president. But then, after that, it was just like it has just been downhill ever since. We had, Sarkozy, then we had, Hollande, and I can't believe I voted for that guy. And, and then now we've got Macron, and I've actually seen pictures of Sarkozy's and Hollande. I have not seen the one for Macron, but I actually saw photographs of the cabinets of the administrative cabinets of Sarkozy and Hollande, and the person who wrote the article pointed out that out of, I can't remember what the number was, but like let's say there were 16 ministers, I don't remember how many they had, but they actually went through and pointed out that out of those 16, something like 13 of them were, from the Atlantic Bridge. They were basically American pro-American supporters, and that was true for Hollande too. So, and you look at Macron, and it's just like, I don't know. I don't. That's what worries me is, can they ever get somebody in a parliament? Well, they don't have a parliament, but they've got a legislature. Can they get a legislator, and a president that can help affect some of these changes? Because right now it just doesn't look good from that point of view.
Well, yeah, but you see that Macron pulled that trick, and you can't necessarily pull it a second time because he came in. People want change, and you see, people always do want change. So when you say you want change, people say, "Yeah, we want change." But he invented his party. I mean, he just the previous governments were taking people who had been in a political party. Now, the party was corrupt and so on and so on, but from being in a political party, they were somewhat political and they had some contact with ordinary people. But Macron just picked people, as they say, from civil society, which can mean anything, with no political experience, who would just do what he said. So he has this majority of people who don't, think for themselves. But I don't know, I just saw there was a poll, like how, of Europeans, of how do you think your government handled the coronavirus, crisis. And the Italians were more favorable to the way their government handled it than the French. The French were the most critical of the way their government. And I mean, that is just one sign of the fact that there is very great discontent. It isn't just the yellow vest. There is huge discontent with this government and with Macron. And if the opposition can come up with anything plausible, of course, there's always the problem that it's likely to be Marine Le Pen, and she'll be branded as being a Nazi, which she's not, never had. But they use that. That's how they got Macron elected, by having him run against somebody that they claim is a fascist, when that is absolutely not true. But if you could, something could happen in the 2022 elections, but it can't happen until then because there aren't any elections until then.
Yeah, I just saw a headline that 2 or 3 days ago that a bunch of or enough, I don't want to say a bunch, but enough of his party members, En Marche, which quite curiously is has the same first letters as his name, Emmanuel Macron. But En Marche, enough of them left the party or bolted from the party, his new party, that he has lost. He has lost the absolute majority in the legislature.
Well, it doesn't. But unfortunately, there's this little central party which he's allied with, so he hasn't quite lost it. And he hadn't lost it in time to defeat a horrible measure that called the Avia law, which commands the Google and all of these people to censor expressions of hate on the internet. This is a horrible law, which can be used. What is hate? Anything can be interpreted that way. Anytime you criticize anything, that can be called hate. And this awful law against freedom of expression was just passed just a few days ago, and then the people left. But of course, it has to go to the Constitutional Court. I'm not sure. I'm hoping that the Constitutional Court will reject this, but I'm not sure because there is this trend to censor the internet. And
go ahead. Keep going.
They use these human rights notions like hate, you see, because they can't say that they're going to censor anybody who criticizes certain policies, but you put in an emotional, undefinable emotion that you're going to censor, and that can cover just about anything that the algorithms decided to cover.
Diana, there are so many. Although you just mentioned that, you talked about the Shoah and all the propaganda. The pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist propaganda in France, and you had a really nice chapter on Dieudonné, the very outspoken stand-up comedian. I mean, your book just really goes into so many fascinating aspects especially about Europe and how it relates to the United States. And I cannot encourage enough for everybody who's listening to this to get Diana's new book, Circle in the Darkness. Memoir of a World Watcher. I mean, and what was really cool, I bought it straight from Clarity Press, and I got the ebook, so it didn't have to be shipped halfway around the world. And not only that, it's not DRM, so I can share it with a friend after I finish reading it. And what was really cool is that when I downloaded it off of Clarity Press, I got both the EPUB, which is like Apple, Apple book, EPUB book, and I got a Kindle version. So you get both versions with the download, and it wasn't expensive. I think it was like maybe $16 or $17. So, and if money's a problem, ask your library, ask your school, ask your university, ask your place of worship, ask your book club, etc., to buy it and read it, and I can promise you will come away much wiser, and your circle of light, as she talked about, will be much bigger, and you'll have a much better understanding of how things are going on in the world and how we got here. Any last comments, Diana? Do you have any other projects in the pipeline?
No, but I'll just say this, because I didn't speak very fluently on this interview, but I'll tell people that I write a lot better than I talk.
Well, you're an amazing woman. I mean, my wife was saying, how old is she? And I said, I don't know. I think she's maybe 10 years older than me, and I'm 66. And then I saw on Wikipedia, you really hold up well. I mean, when I saw you in Bayeux in France last year, I thought you were 10 years younger. So you're an impressive woman, and you've got tremendous energy, and you're still getting after it, and you're still trying to make the world a better place. And I have deep admiration for you.
Well, that's very, very kind of you, and you're doing great work too.
I was hoping to, I was hoping to reciprocate with a dinner in Paris before we left, but or actually in Bayeux, I think Bayeux, but you all left early because the weather was not very good, and then we were supposed to come a week early to Paris, and we didn't come until like the night before before going to the airport, so I didn't get to invite you and Jean out for a reciprocal dinner. And now it looks like it's not going to happen until October. So
Yeah.
I do want to invite you and Jean out for dinner when I get to Paris first thing, and say hello and see you all again. So thank you so much, Diana, for being on the show. It's been wonderful. And again, I will post all of the book links for your books, but especially want to impress on everybody to get her latest book that just came out on Clarity Press, Circling the Darkness, Memoir of a World Watcher, and enjoy an amazing read. Thank you so much, Diana, for being on the show.
Well, thank you, and best wishes.
All right, we'll stay in touch.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Bye.